Hi everyone! Today I'm going to show you how to make these 4 cards using the Simon Says Stamp March 2020 card kit. The theme is Stronger Together and it features a lot of floral images, and it includes a set of 24 watercolor markers that we are going to use to make the cards in today's video. So let's get started with card 1. So for card 1, I am just stamping on some images from the Stronger Together stamp set that's included with the kit in some antique linen distress ink. So this is the distress ink, not the distress oxide ink. And then we are going to use our watercolored pencils to color in the images. The paper I'm using is Arch's cold press paper. And for the coloring, I'm going to take my watercolor pencil, and I'm only using 2 shades here. We're going to use this dark green for the leaves, and I'm going to shade a little bit along the edge where I want the darkest shade to appear on the leaf, and then I'm going to run a little line down the center, like a curved line on some of the leaves as well. And I'm just going to keep working my way up until we get to the top row of these leaves. And the cool thing about this card is that we're only going to use 2 different color watercolor markers. So we're going to use this pretty green for the leaves, and then we're going to use one of the brownish shades for the tree trunk. So now I've taken my paintbrush. So this is a watercolor paintbrush, and it's a size 4. And I just dipped it in a little bit of water, and I'm going to just pull out that color that I applied to the side of the leaf towards the center. And as I go along, I'm going to clean my brush off to get the extra pigment off so that we get lighter and lighter as we get to the edge of that leaf. And it's going to give us this really, really pretty faded dimensional look. So you have one side of the leaf that's very dark, and then it's going to be light through the center, and then a little bit of shading on the other side. So you can use a small paintbrush for this. You could also use a water brush. That would work fine as well. And you just want to make sure that you clean off your brush when you're about halfway through the coloring, just to get that extra pigment off, and then dip it in your water to clean off your brush, and then go back to the image and just blend everything out with just the clear water that's on your brush. So I'm just going to finish up this side here, and then we can move on to the tree trunk. And before we get to the tree trunk, I'm just going to color in the stems with my dark brown marker, or my dark brown watercolor pencil. This is the same color that I'm using for the tree. So with this stamp, you can make that little tree on the left look like either some branches, or you can just make it look like a full tree, depending on how you color it. I'm coloring it so it looks like a full tree. So what I did was I applied my color along the edge and a little more on the bottom. And then I'm just going to spread it out with some water on my paintbrush and just spread to the top. So if you find you need some more pigment, you can just or you can touch the tip of your paintbrush to the watercolor pencil like I had just did here, and that'll give you a little bit more pigment. So that's another way that you can use the watercolor pencils to color if you like. You can either lay a little bit down on your image and pull it out like I'm doing with the paintbrush, or you can just dip your paintbrush to the tip of the watercolor pencil and get color that way. So now we're going to take the painter's tape off, and I just love how soft and pretty this image is. And then we're going to stamp with some black VersaFine ink the sentiment that says "We are always stronger together." And I thought to add to the softness of the card, I'd round the edges with my corner trimmer there. So I just rounded the edges on the panel. We're going to pop it up on some foam tape. And then I also rounded the edges on my cardstock, and I'm using some cardstock in Fog color by Simon Says Stamp for the background. You could also use one of the 3 cardstocks that are in the kit as well. To dress things up, we're going to add these clear little crystal drops to around the sentiment. So I have them in different sizes. These are Studio Katia crystal drops, and I think that just finishes off the card very nicely. So here is our first card made with the Simon Says Stamp March 2020 card kit. Now let's move on to card number 2. So for card number 2, I wanted to use some of the pattern paper and I just couldn't bring myself to cut into it. So I was like, let's try doing something with the cover. So I took the cover and I cut it down a little bit. So this is the cover from the paper pack. And I just love those strips of pattern paper that you get there. So those are the papers that are included in the kit. And then I just cut out this panel on some watercolor cardstock using that Edges die from MFT stamps I showed a minute ago. I'm going to pop it up and put it right on top of our card panel and then add the entire thing to a card base. So I just really love the look of this design. I think it's so pretty and feminine and soft. We're going to take the Hello die and I cut it out 3 times on some fog cardstock and then on this little scrap of watercolor cardstock that I had left over. And I'm going to layer those sentiments together. So I did, there are 3 layers of paper here. I think I'm only going to show you how I put the 2 together, but just add another one. And then here is that little strip that just didn't make the cut when I cut down our cardstock. So I'm going to add it right behind the hello. And that is going to finish off card number 2. So I just love the soft, pretty look of that card. It was real simple to come together. Okay, for card 3, we are going to do some more watercoloring with our watercolor pencils. Unfortunately, my camera did not catch this part of me coloring in the flowers, but on the next card, I will give you a demonstration of how to color the flowers. So don't worry, that's coming up. So I'm going to use this sentiment that says, dreaming of when we'll be together again. I thought it fit real nicely on this little panel right here on top of the flowers. And then I cut out a piece of the pattern paper. I just love the soft watercolor look of the sheet. I'm going to back my focal panel with some fog cardstock just to give it a little pretty finished look. And then we're going to add some foam tape to the back of our card panel and then add that to the card base. So here is our 3rd card. I just love that pretty feminine look with the little pinkish red flowers. All right, so for card number 4, I am using a Slimline die by Trinity Stamps to make this the shape of the card. And then I'm taking some 1/4 inch painter's tape that I found on Amazon.com, and I'm just going to apply it in kind of a wonky fashion. You can do rectangles if you like. You could do these little like prism shapes that I'm doing. It's up to you. And I'm going to stamp some images from the stamp set in the little sections here. So these are the flowers. And to make sure I didn't stamp into the section below, I just put some construction paper in front when I was stamping. And then we're going to use some leaves, another one of the little flowers in this compartment. And then we'll add some more leaves to this top compartment. So I found that I've been having a lot of fun making these prism cards or these swatch cards, however you want to say it lately. It just gives you a chance to kind of play around with a few different designs all in the same card. And it's always easier to make a small design than a large design. So this is kind of a way if you're having any kind of like creative block, I recommend like trying this method. It'll help get you out of the funk because you're not really very committed to any one part of the card because they're so small. Okay, for our flower, what I did was I just added my color along the edges and the bottom of the flower. And we're going to do that with this one right here. And then we're just going to pull it out with our watercolor paintbrush. Like I said, you can use a water brush if that's what you have. That will work fine as well. And I'm just going to pull the color out, making sure to go back and clean my brush off when it looks like I've picked up too much of the pigment, because you want to have different levels of the color in the flower. Otherwise it'll look flat. So to add a little bit of interest here, I'm just going to add a little bit of yellow to some of the petals on this orangey flower. And I'm just touching the tip of my paintbrush to the watercolor pencil to kind of just get a little bit of color. So one thing I don't recommend is once your paper is wet, I would not color directly on the paper anymore. I try that at one point in this video and you'll see, and it doesn't look very nice. It kind of, it's very difficult to blend out if you do that. So if you need to add more color after you've laid down this initial layer of color, just go ahead and use the touching tips method that I showed a second ago. You can also blend two colors together. So we're going to do a few images here where I use two different colors of the watercolor pencil and then pull them both out at the same time. I'll show you that in a second. So for these leaves, I am going to color in these leaves exactly the same way that we did for the leaves on the first card, just applying a little bit of color to the edge and then just pulling out. And the same with the stems. So for the stems, you want to draw them on with your watercolor brush and then just gently pull the color out just so that it gets rid of that kind of crayon look and it looks more like a painted line. So we'll just finish up these leaves and then I'm going to show you how to paint with two colors in the same leaf in this little section. So I'm going to add a strip of blue down the center of the leaves and then I'm going to fill in behind it with my green. And now when we pull the color out, we're going to get this real pretty turquoise color in some parts of the leaf and then we're going to have a dark green edge and it's just going to look really, really pretty and beautiful. So that's all you do. You just kind of start with the blue area and get that wet and then work it into the green and then you get this real pretty mix. So I would recommend, like, if you want to play around with color, try doing this with different colors and just see what kind of combinations that you can come up with. So I've colored in the rest of our little panels and now we're going to add some shading to each of the boxes. So to do that, I'm just going to apply a line of color around the edges of each little box and then I'm going to pull it out with my paintbrush by adding some water to the brush and just working my way inward. When I get close to the images themselves, I'm going to go in with a very, very light wash so that it's almost clear white by the time we get there. The good thing about these watercolor pencils is that they, for me, my little sections dried really quickly, so I didn't really have to wait much to get to this point. And for this little leaf area, I used the gray colored pencil. I wanted to use some different colors in each of the boxes. Just you'll see why in a second when I pull off the painter's tape. It's a real pretty look when you have each compartment with its own color. So I'm just going to pull that color out with my water brush. And then for this section, I took like a brownish orange color. I guess it's more towards a brown. And I'm just going to pull that color out as well. And again, getting lighter as we get to the center of the image. So it's very, very little pigment that you're using here. You only need a little bit of color just to get a nice effect. The one thing you want to make sure of is that you get the color darkest right at those edges of where the tape is, because when we pull the painter's tape off, having a nice clear defined border is going to just help with the overall look of the card. So for these leaves, we're going to use that same gray color that we used at the bottom. And I'm just going to pull that out. And then in a second, I'm going to show you what happens if you apply the watercolor pencil to an area that is already wet. And then I'll also show you how to fix that if you should do that on accident. So this area, I'm going to pull it out and then I'm like, it looks a little boring. So I wanted it to be blue. So now I'm going to go and add my watercolor pencil with the blue. And as you see, it's not going to blend once it's wet on the paper and it's going to keep that crayon-y look. So now I'm working really hard to blend it out and it's not working, but it's such a small spot. We're not going to notice it overall. And look how gorgeous that is when you pull the painter's tape off. I just love the look of those little compartments. So I am using another stamp from the stamp set and I'm going to stamp them with black VersaFine ink. And then I'm going to cut them all apart with my not my die cutting machine, my paper trimmer. And then I'm going to trim the edges with my scissors so that it looks like there are little black strips of paper with the lettering in white. It's kind of like a cheat so that you don't have to do white embossing powder like heat it up that way. I really love this method. It was really, really simple and fast to get a sentiment together. All right, now I'm going to tape our focal panel to the card base, and I had to hand make this card base with just a sheet of 8.5 by 11-inch paper, and then I cut it down to size so that it just fit around the edges of the Slimline card. And then I'm using this tiny thin strips of foam tape by Doris, and I'm just going to attach it to the back of the card. I think these are little 1/8 inch strips of foam tape. I just love it. It's so much easier than cutting out your, normal 1/2 inch foam tape down to size. So I keep these little Doris strips on hand just for situations like this where I'm going to have a real thin piece that I need to add to a card. So after we peel the tape off, now we get to arrange our sentiment, and we're going to arrange them in a wonky fashion. Sometimes we're going to put the words directly on that little line, and sometimes we're going to have them connecting to the panels, and that's it. So I love this card. It says, though we're far apart, you're always in my heart, and I think the little florals there just really get that message across in a real pretty way. All right, let's look at the 4 cards that we made today. So we have our first We Are Always Stronger Together card that we did with just 2 different watercolor shades there. And then we have our pattern paper card that we used the cover of the pattern paper. We didn't even have to cut into our pattern paper for that one. And then the little hello die. And we have another watercolored card there using some pattern paper. And then finally our Slimline card with our wonky arranged sentiment. So those are the cards I have for you today, everyone. I still have a whole bunch of ideas for this March kit, so be sure to check back for another video showing you some other card ideas to make with this kit. Have a great day, and I'll see you again soon in the next video.